For 3 full decades, from 1962 to 1992, Johnny Carson was the undisputed emperor of American late-night television. Every night at 11:30, millions of families left their lights on just to watch this smooth, quick-witted man from Nebraska welcome the biggest names in the world onto that famous couch. The Tonight Show wasn't just a talk show. It was a national institution, the one place where movie stars, presidents, comedians, and singers felt safe enough to drop their masks and be real. But sometimes, being real meant exposing ugly truths that America wasn't ready to hear. In the relaxed, alcohol-loosened atmosphere of the show, old prejudices that had been perfectly normal in the 1940s and 50s came spilling out in the 70s and 80s, when the country was finally starting to call them what they were: racist. Johnny sat right in the middle of two Americas. On one side were the legends he grew up idolizing, men who had built Hollywood when racist jokes, blackface, and Indian gags were just part of the job. On the other side was a new generation of viewers who were marching in the streets, burning draft cards, and demanding that those same jokes finally be retired. Carson himself was quietly progressive for a white guy born in 1925, but he wasn't a firebrand. He hated confrontation. He never wanted his show to become a battlefield. So instead of banning people or starting on-air fights, he developed subtle ways to signal discomfort. A tighter smile, a quicker subject change, a sudden commercial break, or quietly pulling a segment from reruns forever. Today, thanks to thousands of hours of archived footage, we can look back and see exactly which legendary guests forced Johnny Carson into the most uncomfortable positions of his entire career. Here are the 7 most racially problematic guests who ever sat on that couch, ranked by how badly their appearances have aged and how cleverly or awkwardly Johnny tried to handle them. Point 1. John Wayne, the cowboy who said the quiet part out loud. Few men were more worshipped in America than John Wayne. For millions, the Duke wasn't just an actor. He was America itself. Tough, honest, patriotic, the guy who always rode in to save the day. Johnny treated him like visiting royalty every time he appeared. But in May 1971, Wayne sat down for a Playboy interview that blew the lid off the myth. When asked about race in America, Wayne didn't hedge. He said, straight up, "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility." He went on to say that Native Americans were selfishly hoarding land that white people needed, and that he didn't feel guilty about slavery because some people were born to be slaves. The quotes exploded across the country. Protests followed. But Wayne kept coming on The Tonight Show before and after the interview. What changed wasn't Wayne, it was Johnny. Watch the tapes closely. Before 1971, Johnny lights up when Wayne walks out. Big smiles, warm handshakes, easy laughter. After 1971, the smile is still there, but it's thinner. The eye contact is shorter. The laughs come half a beat late. Johnny never called them out on air. He almost never did that with anyone. But the warmth was gone. The last few appearances feel like two acquaintances being professionally polite instead of two friends catching up. Johnny knew exactly what Wayne had said, and you can see it eating at him behind the eyes. America's greatest cowboy hero had just admitted he believed in white supremacy, and the king of late night had to pretend everything was fine. Point 2. Bob Hope, the greatest generation's comedian who refused to retire the old jokes. Bob Hope was the living link to vaudeville, radio, and World War II. He had performed for troops in every war from 1941 to the Gulf, and America loved him like a favorite grandfather. But that grandfather had spent decades doing blackface routines, Chinese stereotypes with taped eyes, and jokes about colored people that made 1930s audiences roar. Most comics from that era quietly dropped the material when the civil rights movement made it radioactive. Bob Hope did not. Even into the late 1970s and early 80s, he would slip ethnic punchlines into his monologues on The Tonight Show stage. Johnny's reaction became a masterclass in polite discomfort. The tight half-smile, the quick, well, anyway. The sudden pivot to, so how was your golf game in Palm Springs? Hope never seemed to notice that the audience wasn't laughing the way they used to. Johnny never told him to stop on air, but backstage the word was clear: tone it down. Hope kept defending jokes of their time until the day he died. Johnny kept smiling through gritted teeth. Point 3. Charlton Heston, the Moses actor who thought civil rights activists were whiners. Charlton Heston played Moses, Ben-Hur, and the last sane man on earth. But by the 1980s, he had become the face of hard-right conservatism as president of the National Rifle Association. On The Tonight Show, he loved steering the conversation toward politics, and more than once he dismissed concerns about systemic racism as whining, or claimed that Black Americans should just work harder, like his immigrant ancestors did. Johnny hated political fights on the show, so he developed a special strategy. Before every Heston appearance, the writers were told to load the segment with light movie nostalgia questions and zero openings for political rants. If Heston started veering into race territory, Johnny would cut him off with a joke or a commercial. Backstage, staff heard Heston make comments about civil rights leaders that were far uglier than anything he said on air. Johnny kept the smile plastered on, but you could see the strain. Don Rickles, the insult king who thought racial slurs were just part of the act. Don Rickles built an entire career on roasting everyone in sight, and for decades he got a bizarre cultural pass to use language that would have ended anyone else's career in 10 seconds. He called Sammy Davis Jr. a spear chucker to his face on stage. He did Asian accents, Jewish stereotypes, the whole catalog. The wild part, many of the people he targeted, including Sammy himself, genuinely loved the guy and defended him. Johnny absolutely adored Rickles. They were real friends. But even Johnny had limits. According to multiple staff members, at least twice Johnny had to hit the commercial button fast when Rickles crossed the line live on air, and once reportedly told a producer, "If he says that word again, we're done for the night." Rickles got more leeway than any other human being in late-night history, purely because Johnny couldn't help laughing at him, even while knowing the material was radioactive. Point 5. Burt Reynolds, the Southern heartthrob who occasionally forgot the year, wasn't 1955. Burt Reynolds was the sex symbol of the 1970s, the charming good old boy with the mustache and the laugh that made women and men weak in the knees. Johnny loved having him on. The two had real chemistry. But every once in a while, Burt would let a joke slip that reminded everyone he grew up in segregated Florida. The worst was a 1978 appearance where he went into an extended bit making fun of Native American activists and using old cowboy movie stereotypes. The studio audience laughed nervously. The mailbags the next week were on fire. Hundreds of handwritten letters poured in. Johnny's response was quiet but decisive. That entire segment was pulled from reruns and has never been officially released to this day. Burt came back many times after that and never repeated the mistake, but the damage was done. Red Skelton, the clown who thought blackface was good, clean fun. Red Skelton was one of Johnny's childhood heroes. When Red walked out, Johnny turned into a starstruck kid again. But Red spent the first 2 decades of his career doing full blackface routines and characters like Clem Cattledehopper and Freddie the Freeloader that leaned heavily on minstrel show traditions. By the 1970s and 80s, whenever Red came on the show, he would complain bitterly about how you can't do good, clean comedy anymore because they, meaning network censors and politically correct people, wouldn't let him do his old characters. Johnny would nod politely, then desperately change the subject to pantomime or Red's paintings. The audience reaction told the real story. Younger viewers sat in stony silence while a few older folks chuckled nostalgically. Red never understood why the laughter had died. Point 7. Buddy Hackett, the comic who flat out refused to update a single joke. Buddy Hackett looked like a cartoon character and told stories that made sailors blush, but a huge chunk of his act never left 1947. He told Polish jokes, Jewish jokes, black jokes, Asian jokes. Whatever the crowd, he had a slur ready. Unlike some others who toned it down over the years, Buddy doubled down. After one mid-1970s appearance that generated a flood of complaints, Johnny took the extraordinary step of banning a specific Hackett routine from ever airing again and personally warned him that certain words and topics were off-limits forever on The Tonight Show. Hackett kept coming back, kept pushing the line, and Johnny kept cutting him off with increasing speed. It became a weird little dance, Buddy trying to sneak old material in, Johnny slamming the door shut before the punchline landed. These 7 men weren't fringe characters. They were giants, icons, American treasures. Between them, they had dozens of Oscars, hundreds of millions of fans, and cultural influence that shaped generations. And every single one of them forced Johnny Carson, night after night, to decide how much racism he was willing to let slide in the name of entertainment, nostalgia, and not rocking the boat. Johnny never solved the problem perfectly. He wasn't perfect. Sometimes he just smiled and moved on. Sometimes he quietly buried a tape so deep it's still missing today. But if you watch the entire 30-year run, you can actually see America changing in real time through Johnny's eyes. The smiles getting tighter, the subject changes getting faster, the warmth slowly draining away from guests he once adored. When Johnny signed off for the final time in May 1992, he didn't give a big speech about race or progress. He just thanked the audience and walked away. But the thousands of tapes he left behind tell the story he never put into words. A slow, messy, painfully human journey from casually accepting the racism of old Hollywood to quietly, stubbornly refusing to give it a microphone anymore.